In this video, we're going to look at the term independent clause. Let's start with a definition. An independent clause is a clause that can stand alone as a sentence. Stand alone as a sentence. That is the important bit. Let's look at an example. John ate the cake before his brother returned from work. In this sentence, John ate the cake is an independent clause. It is an independent clause because we could put some end punctuation on it, like a period or a full stop. In other words, it could function as a complete sentence. Let's look at another example. We are safe from the wolves while the fire is alight. We are safe from the wolves. That is an independent clause. It is an independent clause because it could be a complete sentence. Now, an independent clause contrasts with a dependent clause. And a dependent clause is one that cannot stand alone. In our first example, this is a dependent clause. Before his brother returned from work. That is not a complete thought. It could not stand alone as a sentence. It is a dependent clause. While the fire is alight. Again, that could not stand alone as a sentence. It is an example of a dependent clause. Before we continue, let's remind ourselves of the term clause. It's a group of words that includes a subject and a verb. So let's look at our first independent clause in the first example. We have John, the subject, and ate, the verb. And in the independent clause in the second example, we is the subject and are is the verb. If we now look at the dependent clause in the first example, we have his brother is the subject and returned is the verb. And in the second one, the fire is the subject and is the verb. The yellow clause in each example is an independent clause because it could stand alone as a sentence. That was just a quick reminder on the term clause. The next thing I want to talk about is the word that joins these two clauses together. And this will be part of the dependent clause. And in the first one, it's the word before. This is called a subordinating conjunction. And a subordinating conjunction joins the dependent clause to the independent clause or the main clause. And in the second example, the subordinating conjunction is while. And it joins the dependent clause to the independent clause or the main clause. Before and while are both very common subordinating conjunctions. Other ones are although, after, because, if, even if, unless, until, and when. There are many subordinating conjunctions and we have a whole page on them on the website. Remember, their function is to join the dependent clause to the independent clause. So, who cares about independent clauses and who cares about dependent clauses? Why are they important? Well, when you know what an independent clause is and when you know what a dependent clause is, you can then identify the different types of sentence. And there are three main types of sentence: the simple sentence, the complex sentence, and a compound sentence. Let's put our definition of an independent clause up. So, a simple sentence is one that has one independent clause only. A complex sentence is one that has an independent clause and one dependent clause. And a compound sentence is one that has two independent clauses. Here's an example of a simple sentence. All of these examples are about Venus. Venus is the second planet from the Sun. That is one independent clause. There is our subject and there is our verb. Here's an example of a complex sentence. A day on Venus lasts longer than a year on Venus because it rotates so slowly. There is our independent clause in yellow. A day on Venus lasts longer than a year on Venus. That could stand alone as a sentence. But then we have our dependent clause. A day on Venus is the subject of our independent clause and lasts is the verb. In our dependent clause, it is the subject and rotates is the verb. Our subordinating conjunction is the word because, and remember, it joins the dependent clause to the independent clause. Here is an example of a compound sentence. Now remember, a compound sentence has two independent clauses. Venus has 90 times the atmospheric pressure of Earth. And the second one that could stand alone as a sentence, it spins clockwise on its axis. Venus is our subject, has is our verb. In our other independent clause, it is the subject and spins is the verb. This time, it's not a subordinating conjunction, it's a coordinating conjunction. And we have a whole page on coordinating conjunctions. Okay, but I haven't yet told you why this matters. So far, we can identify independent clauses, we can identify dependent clauses, we know about subordinating conjunctions, and now we know about coordinating conjunctions. But why does it matter? And that's what we're going to cover next. Look at this example. Simon will play the piano. Very simple, one independent clause. Nothing new to say about that. Simon is the subject, will play is the verb. Look at this one. Even if John is available, Simon will play the piano. There is our independent clause, and there is our dependent clause. Notice that this time the dependent clause is at the front. John is our subject, is our verb. In our independent clause, Simon is our subject and will play is the verb. And our subordinating conjunction is at the front of our dependent clause. Remember, it is the link to the independent clause. Now, when a dependent clause sits in front of the independent clause, it is normal to use a comma to show where the dependent clause ends and the independent clause starts. A little bit more on that in a minute. Here is our compound sentence. Simon will play the piano and John will play the guitar. Simon is our subject, will play is our verb. In our second independent clause, John is our subject and will play is our verb. Remember, this is our coordinating conjunction. And look, there is a comma. It is a normal practice to use a comma before the coordinating conjunction that joins two independent clauses. So, the reason why you need to know about independent clauses and dependent clauses is because it'll help you with comma placement. Let's get rid of that. I want to leave you with this slide. It is our definition again, highlighting that an independent clause is one that can stand alone. I also want to remind you what a clause is, a group of words that includes a subject and a verb. John ate the cake before his brother returned from work. John ate the cake could stand alone as a sentence. It's an independent clause. Before his brother returned from work is our dependent clause. Our independent clause has a subject and verb, and our dependent clause has a subject and verb. And our dependent clause is headed by a subordinating conjunction, which links it to the independent clause. Notice that the dependent clause comes second, so there is no comma. Let's look at the same sentence but with the dependent clause first. So our independent clause, or the main clause, is at the end, and our dependent clause is at the start. Notice we now have a comma to show where the independent clause starts. Okay, that's everything I want to say in this summary about independent clauses. Thanks for watching. Be sure to check out some of our other videos on grammarmonster.com.